let's start and look at, we'll spend a bit of this morning looking at SQM and how we can help you to implement SQM within your firm, together with a few tips and tricks for you guys starting out with the SQM. So if we go to the next slide, on the webinar today, for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Christian Stein, and I'm the product manager for all of the assurance products. And with me on the line, we have UNA, and she's one of our independent consultants helping us out with all of the quality management and on the audit side as well. So UNA will take us through the demo today and also give us a few tips and tricks on what to think about when you're implementing your SQM. If we look at our content on the next slide, then what we'll see is that SQM forms part of the assurance ecosystem within Caseware Cloud. So when we look at our ecosystem, assurance then forms part of the full ecosystem within Caseware, on Caseware Cloud, and then SQM forms part of the assurance ecosystem. So going forward, we will then be looking at integrating within that ecosystem as we grow on the cloud. Then if we move on to our content, what was very important for us and what you will see in the demo is we brought in all of the compliant content with the features. So we didn't just design a quality control or quality management system, but we also brought the content to work within the system. We've created many libraries within SQM, and the reason for the libraries is that we wanted to give you a head start in terms of starting with your system of quality management. We did not want you to start from scratch, but we wanted to give you some of those libraries. And it's important to note that you can go and add the library content as and when relevant to your firm, but none of the library content is added automatically. So our content have three different levels. There's mandatory content, and the mandatory content are those that the standard prescribes, and they say the following objectives you will have. Then we have network content, and if you're part of a network, when a network then adds that content, you will have that network content within your SQM. And then we have firm content, and the firm content is either the ones you create yourself or then the ones that you add via our library. Then we also have a built-in risk assessment where we help you to assess the risk and then also what you need to do within responding. And then finally, as I mentioned, we have UNA on the call, who is one of the experts who assisted us in creating the content from the standard, coming up with the libraries. So the standard only contains objectives, but what we've done is we also brought in your risks, policies, procedures, tasks, and examples of those that you can then use within the firm, and that just kickstarts your journey on SQM. So although the presentation is mostly for our South African and African colleagues today, I thought it being important just so that you understand in which regions we also work. So SQM is an international app, and the reason we developed it for international markets is so that when a network actually wants one system of quality management and all want to use the same platform, they can. So we are across many regions, and we then also have different languages that use the content. So if you're part of a network and you want to implement one system of quality management across international waters, you can, and then you can then get the content and maintain it only once, so that you don't have to worry about it being different. And then you can see there's a few countries pending: Portugal, USA, Poland, and France. We're busy onboarding those countries as well. Okay, so if we look at our vision and just what we wanted to achieve with SQM, and hopefully we'll show you during the implementation, is it's first of all to provide you with one single quality management solution. So have everything on one place and not have it all over and across the firm. We also know that there's many facets within SQM and within audit and accounting practices. So that's why we wanted to enable staff to actually self-manage and self-service, and also allow for proactive management of the system. So you'll see some of those with the automation there. And then we also, as I mentioned, wanted to incorporate the full Caseware ecosystem with the information we have, and more of that will come later in this year when we start integrating with some of the other cloud solutions, as well as the desktop solutions, thinking about ISQM2 and some of the other additional requirements. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Anay, to take us through a bit of a tips and tricks and how to set up your SQM so that you guys can get started for the ones that haven't yet done that. Before I do, Anay, if there's any questions, please place them in the questions box, and I will then answer those questions or post them to you, Anay, as we go along during the webinar. But if there's a question, please post them for us in the questions box. Thank you, Anay.
Thank you, Christian, and good morning to everybody from my side as well. So as Christian said, I will be taking us through a bit of the tips and the tricks. I will also be doing a demonstration so that you can see how I work in the product, especially if you've already done it and you were wondering how to better do something or how else to do it or how to get it done. And then, of course, for the new users who have not yet used the product or not yet set up, to see how to get going as quickly as possible. So first of all, why should the firm buy SQM, or why are you using it? What is the point of this extra product? Well, we have a new suite of quality management standards, and the international names as released by the ISSB is firstly ISQM 1, which is the standard requiring your system of quality management, and that is the primary driver for developing this app that we are looking at today. There is then also the second quality management standard, ISQM 2, brand new standard, which contains the requirements for the engagement quality reviews. So in ISQM 1, for example, you'll set up your policies and procedures for why or when you need an engagement quality review on an engagement. And then the ISQM 2 stipulates the requirements and sometimes policies and procedures of what the quality review must entail, who may do it or not do it, etc. So those two actually work together quite closely. Now in the app, we will also have policies and procedures for compliance with ISQM 2, but remember that the work on your audit methodology side will be included in your audit methodology. So if you use Probe Audit or Audit International, your policies and procedures will be implemented through the procedures that are then included in the audit methodologies or the respective audit methodologies. Then also the third one that then completes your suite of quality management standards is ISA 220, quality management on the audit engagement. And there, everything in terms of compliance will be included in your specific audit methodology. So SQM itself will not specifically address anything there, but we do address ISQM 1 and 2. Right, then let's have a look at ISQM 1, which I said is the driving force for developing the SQM app. Now, the standard requires a firm to design, implement, and then operate a system of quality management for engagements that are performed by the firm that will provide the firm with reasonable assurance that both the firm and the staff fulfill their responsibilities in terms of the standards and the relevant requirements. And then moving on then from the staff and the firm, that the engagements that were performed, that the reports issued on those are appropriate in the circumstances. So we've got the system which has the objective of achieving both the compliance with the requirements and then the appropriate reports. But the primary thing here is that you actually first need to design your system, implement it, and then do the operation, which will then hopefully result in achievement of the objectives. But there's quite a lot that goes into the designing and the implementation, as most of you would have learned already. So just also as a quick reminder, when is this applicable to my firm? So the international standards were issued to say all audits, all firms or persons that perform audits must comply with the standard. If you do independent reviews, you must comply with the standard. And then the standard ISQM 1 was also issued with assurance engagements, your ISA 3000 suite of standards, and related services, which are mostly then agreed upon procedures and compilations. Now, of course, in different regions, there are different implementation periods. Some standards in some of the areas do not require related services at all, or will only implement that later. In a South African context, all of this is then already required. So when a South African firm performs, let's say, only compilation and review engagements, the firm must also comply with ISQM 1 and therefore have a system of quality management. So ISQM 1, the standard that requires our system of quality management, has specific roles that they identify and then has responsibilities allocated to those roles. So basically there are 2, but it has been expanded to 3. So we've got these 3 roles. First of all, the firm must identify an individual, or possibly more than one, that has the ultimate responsibility and accountability for the firm's system of quality management, and by default also for achieving the objectives of ISQM 1. Now, this person is quite senior. It's normally the CEO or maybe the managing partner or a similar role. If you've got a board of partners, that could also be the managing board of partners. And they are ultimately responsible for ISQM 1, as I've said. But what's important to note here is they don't just designate or delegate this responsibility. They will also be the individual or individuals that will be actually doing an annual evaluation of the firm's compliance and ultimately conclude on whether these objectives have been achieved. So it's quite important that you appropriately allocate this role. Then secondly, you need a person or persons that will have the operational responsibility. So it's quite obvious then also that the CEO of a firm, for example, cannot do everything in terms of compliance with your system of quality management. So it's acknowledging to say, well, you'll probably get someone or more than one person that will help you with the operations part. And so the operational responsibility is then the role that's accountable for the design, the implementation and the operation. Definitely a lot more involved in the setting up of your SQM app. And then the standard acknowledges that you could also split that responsibility for specific roles or specific elements. So for example, the examples that they gave in the standard, and that's also catered for in SQM, is if you have a person or persons with operational responsibility specifically for the independence requirements and specifically for your monitoring and remediation process. Because in many firms, the monitoring and remediation is done by someone or by a department different to, for example, your technical team, who may be writing up the requirements, training the staff, etc. But then you need an objective eye to come and have a look as to whether this is done. Of course, if you externally get an external resource and you contract a consultant in to do your monitoring, that could then even be your person that takes the operational responsibility for monitoring and remediation. All right, so where does that then fit to your firm? If you're setting up your firm's SQM app, you then have these personas, and we've allocated shorter terms to them. So you've got your UR, the person with ultimate responsibility and accountability, and you will then have to allocate that individual user or the group of users to that role so that they can fulfill the responsibilities and have the access in SQM to fulfill their roles and responsibilities. We then have the operational responsible person, which is likely to be a partner in the firm, perhaps a manager, perhaps a technical manager or quality department. So obviously every firm is different. So you'll have to identify who will be the person or persons who will be taking operational responsibility and then allocate that role in SQM to them. And very similar then with your operational responsibility for independence and for the monitoring and remediation. Again, identify who will be the manager, the partner, the external consultant, and allocate those roles to them. And every single other member of your staff that operates within your firm will then be I want to call it a normal user, but will be a user that will have the access to the application in order to operate within it, to perform their roles and responsibilities, to perform their tasks, to do what they need to be able to do. And of course, before they can do that, they need to know what they need to do. So in the past, we used to have a PDF manual system, quality control manual that was maybe on your server or was standing somewhere in a bookshelf. Now that is all electronic, and every single user needs to have access to that system of quality management with all the policies and procedures. All right, so that's where you will then allocate your staff. Now let's just quickly just step back one step and say, how does SQM help us as a firm to comply with ISQM 1? Now, ISQM 1 basically has a requirement that a firm must implement a risk assessment process, which they will use to then design, implement, and operate the system. And then also, almost as a catch-all, also have a monitoring and remediation process to make sure that what is intended to be achieved is actually being achieved. And look, life's not perfect, no firm's perfect. If you do come across any deficiencies, any problems, anything that should have happened but that didn't happen, any possible risk that you missed, or policy that you forgot to implement or that you didn't realize had to be there, if you then come across those problems, well, great, then we will continuously improve and continuously adjust and amend our system. And that's basically how the standard envisages a firm should operate its system. Now, the 6 little lines in the middle of this picture is really indicating the 6 components that the standard identifies, being your governance and leadership. In the past, we just had leadership. We've got the relevant ethical requirements. We've got resources, which includes your human resources and all the other resources. So all of those elements are then catered for in SQM through those libraries that Christian mentioned before, and we then guide the users to operate and implement the risk assessment process, but also through the monitoring process. So ultimately, if you follow the process in SQM, you should be compliant with ISQM 1 because we help you through every step. So in SQM, we then drive or guide you to, first of all, obtain an understanding or document your understanding of the firm system, or before the firm system of the firm itself and the engagement. So there's lots of questions. I'll show you when we look at the demonstration as well. But a lot of the guidance that ISQM 1 says, we need to consider all of this information about us as a firm in order for us to be able to actually identify the risks, appropriately assess the risks, and of course, develop the appropriate responses, because responses will look different in different firms, different services that you give, different areas that you operate in, etc. And then to establish the quality objectives, now we've already included the mandatory objectives, so you can of course establish additional ones if you want to. Identify risks. Now, what is a risk? It's not an audit risk like we would have in a normal audit. This is a risk that the objectives that we have set will not be achieved or may not be achieved, and then the likelihood of that actually happening and the impact or the effect if that was to happen. Then we guide you to design and implement the responses to address those risks so that hopefully those risks don't occur at all, or of course, if they do occur, how do we fix them? And then at the end of the year or towards the end of the year, the firm will sit back and evaluate, is this firm system working as it's intended to? Are we achieving the quality objectives? Or do we need to amend? Do we need to change? I mentioned earlier that continuous improvement system. And then, of course, we also guide you to conclude. So that's really the firm's risk assessment process that is required by the standard. We follow then a very similar workflow in SQM. So those of you that have been in the product, you would have seen that you have these 5 headings or tabs, if you want: menu items, design, operate, operate overview, then your monitoring, and lastly, your evaluate. But you'll also see on the left-hand side, there's a little module that's sitting outside of that circle of continuous improvement, and that's your settings. So we'll start with the settings and see, how do I allocate roles to users? How do I see what each person is going to have access to? All right, so with that in mind, that's the workflow. We're going to start from settings and work straight through to evaluate so that you can see how to set up everything. And of course, what's next? How does this workflow happen? Good. So let's start in the demo. I'm just going to open the site for us and see that we can see the product. So I haven't even gone anywhere specific. This is literally the page that I see when I log in as the user. And you will notice here that I land up on Operate and SQM. So that is basically our firm's system, our manual, if you want, from the old days, to say if a person logs into the system, I will land up exactly here where the firm system of quality management is. Now we'll have a look at how to change, how to open, close, etc. this later on. But I want us to start exactly there where we were earlier, and we said we're going to start in settings. What is it that I need to do, and how do I do that? All right. So in Caseware Cloud, what is important is that before we set up SQM, if you don't have cloud yet and your users haven't operated on it yet, you will first have to upload your users and give them specific roles and allocations on the cloud platform. All right, once you've done that, so for example, some will have administrative rights, some will just be trainees with very limited rights, etc. Then I go to the burger menu, and if I had wanted to go to the app itself, this is where I would have clicked. Some of you may have seen that before. But I then go all the way to the bottom to settings. And in settings, I select SQM for my importing and exporting. But we're not going to do that just yet. We're going to first go to staff and groups. This is where I allocate my users and my roles. So for staff, for example, I don't have a lot of staff in here. This is my demo site. So we've only got 4 users. And so for Christian today, I'm going to allocate him some roles. I'll select the individual user and I'll go to the edit button and say, right, for Christian, in the apps, these are the apps that he, or the elements that he has access to. So create is something that at the moment, it's just take away all his rights. Sorry, Christian. The moment he has access to SQM, he will also have access to create. Now, create is just where all your staff are going to be, because they need to be able to create tasks. They need to be able to have access to see that system of quality management, etc. But the advanced roles will then be allocated to the persons that need access to design in order to design the system of quality management. Traditionally, then your ORs, or your persons with operational responsibility. You will also give your UR, the ultimate person, access to design. Why? Because they need to check what's happening so that they can approve the system, and that can then be published. Your evaluator will have access to evaluate. It's possible that you might also give your ORs access to that in order to monitor or to look at some of the reports, etc. If I say monitor, it's monitoring the reports, not monitoring the system. The monitoring and remediation process, so obviously the persons that will have to do the monitoring is going to need access to that. You may also give access to the individuals that design the system, if that's not the same person as the person doing the monitoring, because we'll see that we're going to develop the monitoring activities. We're going to design them in Monitor itself. And then also your evaluator might want to go and have a look at what monitoring was actually done. When we look at the responsibilities of the evaluator, you'll see they actually need to see the results of the monitoring already. Operate overview is quite an important role as well, but it will be only to limited users, and those would be the individuals, possibly partners, technical managers, that's going to see that people are actually completing the tasks as they should be. All right, so I'll simply select the roles that's relevant, click on save, and then I'll close this page. Now that's for individuals. If I wanted to also do the same or similar, or save time, I've allocated staff to partners, maybe I've allocated a group to managers, trainees, etc., all of those roles. I can very, very easily do the same thing for that group of staff. Now, my group only has myself in there, but if I've got, let's say, 10 or how many ever persons in there, I don't have to go to the individual role to go and set up each and every staff member through the SQM roles for individual staff members. I can simply take my audit managers, take the partners, and give them the roles that's relevant. Take away what's not necessary, save, and close. All right, so that could be a very, very useful way, is to use your groups of users rather than setting up the roles for each individual. All right, I went to settings earlier on. In settings in SQM, just so that you know that if you are part of a network, we have a whole functionality here for the networks where they can simply import any network required objectives, risks, policies, procedures, etc. Simply drag your file there, import one click of a button, and they are all then imported as necessary. If you are a network to export, that happens somewhere else, but this is then very, very quick. If the network firm globally or over your country distributes certain requirements, you import it, 2 ticks, and it's in there for you to consider. All right, so that's your settings. First of all, your staff and user role setups, and then the importing of network items where necessary. Right, so we can go back to SQM now. And before we start jumping into how to develop the system, I want us to just have a quick look at some tips on settings so that we can just maybe, if you wanted to write them down or make a note of them, and move on. First of all, because every single user has to have access to the system to do their tasks, to complete whatever they need to see what the requirements are of the system, of the policies and procedures, every user has to have a license. So you've got to sort out your licensing before you implement SQM. And then to assign user roles to every single user. That's also quite important. All right, so let's have a look then at the design mode. Please, if you've got any questions, you're welcome to pop them in there. Christian's monitoring them, and he will also let me know if there are any specific questions that we can address as we go along. So please feel free to pop your questions as soon as they come up. Right, so then we've now allocated our user roles on the Caseware cloud, and now we need to design the system on SQM. So where I start is first of all on responsibilities. Responsibilities, you'll probably now recognize these 4 columns. Those headings are exactly the 4 roles that we have from ISQM 1. And in the system, you need to add users, however many you need to allocate those specific roles. But at the end of the day, before you can say, right, I've set up my responsibilities, I can move on to setting up the rest of my system, I need to have at least 1 user allocated each of these 4 roles. I need to have them accepted the roles and another person to have actually reviewed or approved the allocation of that role. Okay, so that's the important thing in terms of responsibilities. Adding a role is very easy. You simply click add. I'm going to just indicate allocate Christian just so that you can see how quickly it happens. Allocate him operational responsibility. If you have an appointment letter, you can always just include the role here and then click OK. Christian will get an email to say you've been allocated, and he can come in and sign off the responsibility here. Okay, so you can very quickly see what roles he has. I can't sign off on his behalf. He signs off, and then I could sign off as the reviewed by person. All right, so that is quite easy. If I was to let me quickly unsign off this one from another user. When I want to sign off, I get a little dialogue to say, what am I actually clicking for? So if I'm accepting the responsibility, there's a whole explanation of what I'm accepting, the role, and it's adjusted for each of the roles. Or when I am reviewing the responsibilities, I say that I'm happy that this person can actually perform this role, has the necessary time, etc. All right, so that's responsibilities. It's very important that we have 1 person allocated to each of these 4 roles. Then moving on to setup. Setup, don't confuse setup with settings. Settings was where we imported the network items and we allocated the roles for with Caseware Cloud. That was cloud settings if you want. This is now set up for my system of quality management. And you can already see we're talking international standards matters here. So we're talking firstly, which applicable standard. The default will be for selecting audit ISQM, American English International, and purely because that's what the standard was initially written in. But if I say, well, that's not actually the standard I'm going to use, in my country, in my firm, we have to comply with, let's say, ISQM, but we use British English. Okay, so then I will actually unselect that. Sorry, I deselected first. I always have to have 1 selected. So I want to select British English, but we are going to use the normal international standard. Or in a South African context, I'm saying, yes, we use the international standard, but I'm in South Africa. So I actually need additional requirements for the RBA requirements. If I read the code, I want to see RBA code, not the general or generic ISPA code. we have specific rules in terms of report irregularities, for example. If I want to see what content has come through from there, I would rather select South Africa rather than my British English. Okay, for the sake of today, I'm not going to select South Africa. I'm going to keep British English. I only need to comply with one standard. So that's fine. That's the standard we're going to comply with. And then I will sign it off and say that's the standard that we're going to use. Now, all the content will be filtered according to the standard, and if you basically want the language also that we have selected. So it really is only necessary to select one standard and the language that you want. If, however, it is a network, the network will, of course, select all the relevant ones so that they can see the content for all the relevant ones. The next part, which is really crucial, is to finalize your risk assessment matrix. And this is really so that when we get to risk assessment later on, the functionality will actually work to know what is automated. Okay, so more on that later. What do I need to do here? The standard requires us to assess risks based on the effect that risks could have on the achievement of quality objectives and on the probability that those risks could occur. So the default here gives us 5 elements to select, and when we do the risk assessment later on, we're going to have drop-down menus with these 5 options. But as a firm, we now need to say what would be the combined or the risk assessment result based on all of the different options of those 5 drop-down menu options. And this is what we set here. So I've already signed it off. I've already decided I'm happy with all of the responses, and that is what anyone in our firm is going to see. If they select likely and minor, they will all get a medium risk assessment. If they get unlikely and minor, they will all get very low. Of course, if you don't want to use very low, you only want to use medium, high, low, and anything like that, that's your option. You can come and set it here as you need to. And then the next part that you set is based on those results. So essentially we have those 4 results or 4 possible results. What do you want the response to be in the firm? So the procedures and the policies that we're going to implement for each of these responses, what level do you want? And so first of all, there is none. So none basically says that if the risk assessment is low enough, I'm going to say it is not a quality risk. And the standard says we only have to generate or create or design and implement responses for quality risks. So I've identified a risk, something that could go wrong. I've assessed it. It's really unlikely to happen. It won't have a major impact on my system. I'm going to say it's not a quality risk and I'm not going to implement any response. Or I can say, well, there's a medium risk or a low risk, and I'm going to rather respond to it. So we also then have the moderate or the medium, if you want, response and a significant response. So these are obviously your serious risks where you need a lot of responses, more than one response, or a very strict response, something that will give you more assurance in terms of your response. The applied judgment, you'll see later on, is really to say, well, in some of these cases where we're going to get a low risk, we're going to say, well, it's not a quality risk, and I'm basically going to opt for no response. Or in some of these cases, we're going to say it is a low risk, but we actually need a response for that. Let's implement a response, and we're going to go with a moderate or significant response. Okay, if you don't like the applied judgment, just don't tick it here, and you won't see it in the rest of your system. It has to be signed off before you can continue with your risk assessment. The standard then further asks us to obtain an understanding. So the design understanding is really the part where we are prompted with a variety of questions to complete to document the understanding that we have. Remember those 2 parts of the firm and its staff, and of the engagements, the nature, the industries, the etc. of the clients themselves. So that's really what we'll be prompted for. So we've got a variety of little menus. You simply click on the header to open up the part. You can either answer by typing in the responses and signing off, or if you've got a simple question, you can simply say, does the firm offer any specialized professional services? Yes, and that can also be signed off. Okay, so that's, in some cases, it's literally a matter of clicking a simple response. In other cases, there's the space provided to document. Of course, you can open up or increase the fields. You can add an annotation, so add a link to a document if you need to, etc. Then right at the bottom of this document, there's a sign-off here. This sign-off is not like a work program sign-off. This one is rather where after we've documented the understanding, and possibly even after we've then gone and recorded the risks and seen that we have identified all the risks, where someone like, for example, your UR, your person with ultimate responsibility, would have reviewed your objectives and your risks and come and say, yeah, I reviewed and agree that all objectives and risks are complete. Why is that? Well, because the standard says you need to obtain an understanding and use that understanding to go and identify risks. So any of the user can actually sign off here, but it is preferable that the UR or one of the URs should be signing off here. And then also, once you've signed this off, you cannot actually go and change anything at the top anymore. Okay, so again, this is like a final step before we move on. Good. Then we've got the objectives. Now, this is where we're going to design the stuff, where we're going to write everything that's going to go into the system. So in objectives, I have a list of mandatory objectives. You'll remember that Christian spoke about types of content. We've got mandatory, firm, and network. Mandatory are basically the things that the standard says you must have. So the standard says these are the, I think, 17 or 18 objectives. Those are the ones we must have. But you do have the option to indicate where something is not relevant. And this is consistent for all of these elements where we've got mandatory content. So I'll just quickly go in. I'm not actually looking at what the content is, so please don't worry too much about what the content is. But let's say, for example, this was a mandatory objective. And in our firm, honestly, this is not relevant to our firm. We can simply go in and say, no, it's not relevant, and then document why this objective, or if it was a policy response, or if it was a procedure response, why this mandatory item is not relevant to our firm. I will then document, I'm just going to quickly document something there and save it, and that's it. And now you'll see that there's no longer a tick on the left-hand side where the relevant column is, and I also cannot sign it off. That says, well, the requirements for sign-off is not met. So now this objective, which looks a little bit unrealistic, but this objective is not relevant to our firm. We don't need to go and identify risks. We don't need to assess risks, etc., because we've said this is not applicable to us as a firm. For a firm with, let's say, a sole proprietor firm, you might be able to identify some items in your resources and some of those elements where you could easily just basically say, yes, it is there, but it's not applicable to my firm. Okay. So the mandatory ones, the important thing here is the mandatory items are all included in your table when you land on the page. The libraries that Christian spoke about are included in your add a new item option. And in this case, that will be objectives, risks, etc. We do not have a library for objectives because we've included all of the objectives from the standard. And we've really spent a lot of time trying to think of any objective or any even risk to try and see where could we add an additional objective. And we found that it's probably going to be counterproductive to try and add additional objectives. So we really believe that all of the risks, all of the matters that you could identify will fit into one of the standard mandatory objectives. All right. So I'm going to today take you through the objectives for basically to say we want to make sure that clients comply with the ethical requirements. And so I'm just going to say ethical. And I'm going to choose firm fulfills the ethical requirements, because the reason here is that I want us to see whether the staff records the gifts and other inducements that are given or handed to clients when they when they are offered them, and whether they consider if that is perhaps a threat to their objectivity, independence, etc. So I'm selecting this one. You saw that I was searching in the title field. You can search in a variety of these fields. I found the one 1.2 that's relevant for me, and I want to just go through it and edit it as required. Some of the fields are grayed out because those are mandatory, so I cannot actually change them. The objective is already documented there. I cannot change it. That's the wording from the standard. All right. If I want to add any additional information, I can add here. And I can then go and select if there's more or less standards that's relevant. Because I'm only selecting one standard, I probably won't go and fiddle with that. I don't need to change it. I do have the option to add sub-objectives if you want to add them. And I could add links notes, and then also something maybe from your objectives not so helpful, but definitely with policies and procedures where you can stipulate from a specific date when a matter will be relevant in your firm. So you could then already publish it, have it in your system, and even though the procedure or the objective or something will be shown in your system, everybody will know it's not relevant yet. It's not applicable or effective yet. We only have to comply with this policy, this objective, etc. from, let's say, 1st of September. But you don't want to only have to publish it on the 31st of August or on the 1st of September, wake up at midnight to go and publish this. No, we'll publish it so long and everybody will know it is effective from that date. And then another thing also is, let's say if you replace one procedure with another procedure later down the line, well, then you've got the effective to field to say this element will only be applicable to a certain date, and you'll go and create your new one, have that one effective from another date. So let's say this specific one is effective to 31 August. After 31 August, this one will simply disappear from the published system, of course, as long as I have published the change. So it will show until the date that I've said effective to, and then after that, it will just disappear, so not be there anymore. But any of the changes made in design must be published for it to take effect. Okay, so I can just want to say play around here as much as I want to. If I do not publish, nothing will happen to my actual system. Okay, I'm basically in draft mode all this time. Good, so back to our objective. I will sign off the objective, and that one is now happy, ready, moving along. Let's go and have a look at risks. So there are already a few risks that are signed off. There was a network one where our network maybe prescribed something and we said it's not relevant to us. We've documented why it's not relevant. There, we do not audit listed companies, so it's not relevant to us. And so therefore, this one will just not be published. But we've documented our consideration. All right. Now you can see I've only actually recorded 3 risks here. The risk that we want to identify has to do with gifts and inducements. So now I'm going to go use my library. Add a new risk. I can, if I want to, actually go and select the objective that we used, because it will then already help me to filter some of these items. So I'm going to say ethical, and I'm going to go and select the ethical one that we just signed off. MORER, which is relevant ethical requirements, fulfills ethical requirements, the firm. There is another one with network and service providers. We mostly just concerned with a firm today. So we've selected that one. That's the one we've linked the objective to. And now we're going to go look in the library. So you can see already the objectives is linked there. Okay, I think I've maybe selected the wrong one. So let's we can still filter if we know it's got to be 1.2, we can filter that. Or something easier for me is, now I'm going to work with gifts. So let's just go and look for any risk relating to gifts. And I can see, okay, there's only one there. So I'm going to select the risk with regards to inducements, including gifts. I can see there's some links there. And I can even see that there's a policy already in there. Not that that matters too much at this stage, but we know it's there. So most of the content is then already completed because it comes from the library. But I'll still go through it. I see, okay, this is a firm one because I created it from the library. I guess it's going to be relevant if we're importing it. There's the risk documented. You can change the wording. You could use the additional description if you haven't already done it there. I don't really need to document the applicable standard, but if you wanted to, you can select the one. There's only one option. If I wanted to include a specific paragraph reference, I could do that. And this now is where we get to the risk assessment. So this here is where I'll use those drop-down menus that I referred to earlier on, and I'm going to say, let's say, well, it's possible that we're going to get gifts that might influence our independence. What would be the risk on the achievement of the objectives? Well, let's say minor. Okay. You can see that now, based on those 2 selections, automatically I've got a risk assessment. A result is low, and response required, judgment applied. So those 2 responses, those 2 fields are physically, literally completed based on what we set up in setup earlier on. Okay. I can then also document here my reason for deciding on the possible and the minor. So I will document my reason there. Please document something detailed, not just like I'm quickly going. And then I will decide, right, so we said judgment required. Am I going to do nothing? I'm going to have a moderate response, significant response. Well, actually gifts and inducements is quite a tricky one, and you know, even if we don't think it's going to affect it, you're always worried about what it's going to look like. So let's rather select significant response. Okay, why significant response? Well, because you can be seen to be impacted by the gift, etc., etc., and so that's how it goes. You'll see that a lot of these fields have little stars. The red stars, we've got red stars here at the top somewhere. Red stars must be completed before I can save the objective. Even if I'm not done, or the risk or any dialogue that I'm busy with, I must complete all the red fields to save it. But then, before I can sign it off, I need to have completed all the blue stars or the blue asterisks. Okay, I've completed it. I'm not going to link a policy yet. I haven't done the policy yet, so I'll link the risk to the policy when I develop the policy later on. It's going to be effective immediately when I actually complete it, and so I'm going to just click save. It looks like I've done everything because now I can sign off as prepared. Prepare risk 146, my gifts and inducements one. Good. Then for the policy response, I've now identified the objective, the risk, and the policy response is next. For the policy, I want to go and say, well, we need a policy to actually address gifts and inducements. So I'm going to look for policy response there, maybe not gifts, let's look for inducements, something like that. Oh, look there, it works. Okay. I specifically use the gift one because a lot of us still refer to gifts, but the standard actually, or the code, refers to inducements. So sometimes you just need to go look for something that's similar, or the new words from the standards. So this is now the policy response that we're going to actually create then. And you'll see again, this one is from the firm because it was previously done from the library. So I did it in preparation for today. The linked risks, well, now we can go and select the risks. We had risk inducements, including gifts. So we're going to just select that one. That's the relevant risk. You can see I don't have a library as before because we've already selected the one. The title, all of these things, you could go and change this, okay, because it is your firm only one. Policy response, here says the firm applies the conceptual framework. You can go and add whatever you need to. Maybe just a quick thought. You have policy response and you've got procedure response. Policies is defined in ISQM 1 as to say, how is the firm going to address the risk? And then the procedure response is basically saying, okay, physically, what are we going to do in order to actually implement the policy? So you've got a policy to say how we're addressing a risk. The procedure is what do we do to make sure that we are addressing the risk. So they're very close. The procedure is often then an action that you're physically going to do. All right. So we can go through, there's a lot of additional fields here for you to use. I have already linked the procedure response, but you could also go and link additional procedure responses. I'm going to have it effective immediately, and there you can see I even have the option to sign off prepared by immediately. All right, and then I can simply click close, and I've done my policy response. So maybe just to remove the search functionality or the filter at this stage, again, I've got lots of mandatory items, okay? All the mandatory ones, I've got a network one, and there's my firm procedure policy responses as well. As a reminder, why do we have policies that are mandatory? Well, there's a paragraph 34 in ISQM 1 that says the firm must at least have the following policies or procedures. The challenge here, or the nicety perhaps to some of us, is that it's a policy or procedure. So we have in the mandatory lists added both a policy and a procedure in your mandatory table for policies and procedures. If you only want a policy or a procedure, you can then actually just say, well, this one is not relevant, and say why it's not relevant. I've got the procedure, I don't need the policy, or whatever the case is. All right. But otherwise, most cases you actually need all of the mandatory ones. Or if the mandatory one is maybe already addressed through your network one, well, then you're going to go with your network one perhaps, and document why the mandatory one's not relevant. So just have a look at that. Don't ignore your mandatory ones. They are there for a reason. And in most of the cases, you'll even see the paragraph requirement. You see the paragraph 34C. So why is that a mandatory item? So that you can go and address them. Okay. So that's your policy response. And then we're going to go with a procedure response to say, well, we're going to want to have a gift register, and we can go with inducements again, because maybe the gift is not there. We're going to record all inducements in the firm's register. All right. So here we are going to say, how are we physically going to do this, or what actions are we going to take? So there's the procedure response again. Because it's a firm response, it's not the mandatory one, we can actually edit it as we want to. We've tried to already say, well, if you are using this library, you're probably using SQM. So we, for example, then said this is achieved through completing the gifts and other inducements task on SQM app. If you want to use your own other something, of course you can do that. But especially where there are already tasks in the library, you can just easily then select those. We've already linked the task. I'll show you the task just now. And then what's important with the procedure response is actually to document the nature, timing, and extent. So in terms of nature, there's a bit of guidance there to say what does it mean. So the standard has spoken about preventative, detective, corrective type of procedures. Are you using a manual process or technology? So you'll see I said they were going to use SQM. You could even consider whether you need additional resources in order to implement this procedure. Then the timing part, timing talks about whether it's a manual procedure or a scheduled procedure. Scheduled procedures are almost what I call them automated procedures. So automated would be where we're going to say annual declarations, for example. Every year on the 1st of February, we want all our staff to complete their annual declarations. Then we will schedule it as a scheduled procedure. Even if I show you in scheduled, we can then go and edit the frequency. I can choose to have it every day. I can choose to have it weekly on a Monday, or weekly on a Monday and a Saturday, or whatever day you choose. Monthly, if there's certain reports or certain checks that needs to happen every month, or the first Monday of every month, or of every second month, or every third month. Maybe you want to do something quarterly, you can choose every third month. Or in the case of our annual declarations, let's say we're going to want to do it the first day of February every year. And that will then set the frequency for the procedure to be automatically created in your user's operate space. Now, what's important is that only if the procedure has been set as scheduled with a frequency and the task has been created, and both of those have been published, only then will the procedure automatically appear. So let me say that again. If the procedure has been set to scheduled and you've selected the frequency, and it's been signed off and published, and you have set the related task, signed it off, and it's been published, only then will your procedure or your task automatically appear in your users' operate sites. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Okay. In the case of our gift register, I cannot say, oh, my staff is going to get a gift register, a gift or inducement every week, every month, once a year, whatever the case is. So I'm going to make it a manual task that they're going to have to generate themselves or create themselves. We'll see that. So I'll say this is applicable to all firm personnel. There's a few other options there. Who, all gifts, okay, or only a selection, and then you need to say what selection. I can then go and assign it again to individual users, or, so there is a blue asterisk, but it's one of these two, or as an assigned group. So the easier thing here is to say, well, all managers, all partners, or whatever, because that what's happened, nice in that case also is, if I have a person who is, let's say myself, I was a supervisor, but supervisors don't have to comply with a specific procedure. Now I get a promotion and I become an audit manager, or maybe even an audit partner. And my responsibilities in SQM is quite different. Now I've got to remember, oh man, she got a promotion, I need to go and allocate it to all the procedures. No, just move her from the supervisor group to the manager or partner group. And just like that, she or he or they will automatically get all the procedures that they need to be performing in their system of quality management. Right, so using your signed groups is so important if you want to actually get the efficiency from, especially from the automation parts. All right, again, we're going to have the procedure be effective immediately. Just want to check that I've selected the right things I want to show later on. Yes, right. Now we're going to say prepared, and that's all done. So I've now designed an objective, risk, policy, and a procedure. We still need that task for it to actually appear on our operate site. So tasks, yeah, I've already selected one again from the library. I could have selected it from tasks. And I have had a look at what is in the library one, link procedures there, gifts, etc. The critical thing here is that we've got this, I want to say cool, form editor. I can see the editor is already, or the form is already complete. There is details included in there, but have a look at this. So here, you can actually physically change what is in this form. Okay, it's almost like your working paper form, not your working paper form, but like all the fields you want in your register. So I can literally go and change what I want in there. I've literally designed this thing myself. So I promise you, you can do this too. You can say, what is your name? What is the gift? And a lot of questions that you want to have recorded, and save the form. And that's then the form that the user is going to have to complete when they get an inducement or when they need to record an inducement. So that's the task. I can again select applicable standards, have notes, effective dates, etc. And that's the task. So at this stage now, we have designed all of the elements. And remember, we have signed off procedure response. We've signed off the task. So if it was an automated one, we're not there yet where it would automatically happen. Once I've gone through all the objectives, all the risks, all the policies, etc., I must come to my draft system of quality management and come and review it. So what you will see here is a bunch of, you could actually make it smaller if you wanted to, all the objectives, and then with each of those objectives, they're linked risks. In this case, for example, the one we've worked with, I have more than one risk. You see there, I've got 2 risks. There are policies, procedures, etc. There's even 2 tasks there for the annual declaration, etc. So I can now go and review this. What is important with the review part is I have errors and warnings, if you want to just see what the differences are. Errors and warnings, which I need to address. Warnings are fine. I can live with warnings. Warnings are just saying, just have a look here. You've got a policy, but no procedure. Is that how you wanted it? Yes, happiness. Move along. It could also be that you don't have a task and it's just warning you. But if you have any errors, you cannot approve and publish your system. So an error would be, for example, where you've got a procedure that's almost going to say just flying loosely here. It's not actually linked to the policy, to the procedure, etc. Or you've got an objective without a risk, or a risk without a response, etc. If you have any of those errors, you need to go back to that case, go and let's say it was a policy response or it was a risk that didn't have a response. It's possible then that either the response was not signed off as prepared by, and then it appears and it goes in here, because remember, all of the items must be signed off. Or it's also possible that maybe there was just not a link. So we had the risk, I might just need to go into the risk and actually include the link and sign it off again. Okay, then those are all addressed. As soon as I don't have any errors, I can then approve the system of quality management. Again, we would prefer that someone quite senior, maybe your UR approves it. And then you can see I just did that 15th of August. And then I have the publish button available. Up until this point, we're just in draft mode, remember? I cannot see what's in the system of quality management. My actual manual has not been generated yet. Or if I'm making changes to that, I'm still on the old version. So I'm now going to click publish, and it's going to then take all the policies, procedures, risks, etc., and publish it to the system that the staff is going to see. Are you sure you want to publish this version? Yes, please. And it will then update that publish. You can see now it's changed to the 15th of August since the last time I did the publish. All right, we're going to look at the actual system just now. This is also where the export button is, where if this was a network system that they designed, they will export the information, which will then be imported by the individual network member firms. Before we move on to operate, let's just remind ourselves again of what is necessary in this module, quite a big module. So for the design, you have to have all 4 of your responsibilities allocated, your UR, OR, your independence, and your monitoring and remediation. The risk assessment and your matrix must be signed off for your risk assessment to work in the design of the risks. And then remember, the system is developed to have a risk, then a policy response, then a procedure, then a task. And only if you have the procedure response and the task designed and signed off and published will the automatic ones appear. Okay. Manual ones must also be signed off and published, but manual you might actually come across by yourself. It's like, oh my word, I wanted to actually now go and declare a gift. Why do I not have a gift here? Oh, I see there was a problem with a publish. But the automated ones, people are going to forget about because they're waiting for the system to send them the automatic one, right? And then you have to publish your system of quality management because only once you've published it will it appear in your operate, which is where your staff is going to see it. Okay, so that was design. Let's have a look now at operate. So operate, you can...
Before we move on, just two questions that we have on the design part. So if we look at the responsibilities, so if you're a small firm and you may be the only person, a sole practitioner within the firm, the question we have is, if you then add yourself, I think first of all you need to allocate all the responsibilities to yourself. You can then accept that, but you won't be able to sign off as reviewed. Would that be a problem for the SQM?
So Christian, there's two elements to that. First of all, I think practically it's not a problem. So you can still operate, that's fine. Ideally, you'd also want to be able to sign off as reviewed by, and that is just, let's call it a known issue at this stage, which the developers are working on to address for us. Because ideally, I would actually, if I'm a sole proprietor, I don't even want to have a reviewed column. I want to say, except by, I'm the UR, finish and clear, nothing more. So that is something that we are working on in terms of improving the experience from especially the sole proprietor, or then the person that's the ultimate taking the ultimate responsibility, so that you just click once and there's no one else that still needs to check up on you, basically.
Perfect. Thanks, Jana. And then the second one is, what if you don't have all the policy responses? So if you don't have a policy response yourself, and you don't have an inducement policy, would you then have to go create your own policy for the firm?
Sorry, Christian, I think I missed somewhere in the middle. Could you just repeat that?
So if you as a firm do not have a policy response, for example, they don't have an inducement policy specifically, do they then have to create their own policy there?
So we've already developed a policy in the library, and we've tried very hard to actually give you guidance. Let me just quickly show you this one, for example. So we've tried to give you a lot of guidance in terms of what you might still need to add. So we said here the firm applies the conceptual framework to identify and address any potential threats. So if you go have a look at the ISPA or IRBA code for inducements, it actually gives you a very good step-by-step process, and that's why we didn't even try to come up with a nice fancy policy here, because the code already tells you what to do. In some cases, in some of the policies, a firm needs to go and decide, let's say for example, how long you're going to keep your documentation. So the firm needs to decide, are we going to keep our documentation for 3, 5, 6, 7, how many ever years? So then try to word it such that you've already got the policy, but we also then just say firm to specify a number of years. So that to some degree, especially for the smaller firms, you should already be able to have a policy just with what is in the library, but you always have the option to expand on that, either by documenting additional documentation, or again, remember we had the link somewhere to add links. If you had or wanted to add additional documentation, you could also include a URL to your actual policy. But to come back to the question about what if I don't have a policy yet, I want to say that already what's in the library is a very good start. And you can always work on, remember our process of constant improvement, and in our process of constant improvement, having this is already a good start. You can always improve on it or add to it in time to come, and have a separate policy if you really want to. But remember that when we look at the policy, at the process just now, at the system, the staff is already going to see this policy. So that could already, in most cases, give them a lot of guidance. And then also there are some of these procedures and policies that have a lot of content in, just because the standard requires so much detail. So you might actually find that, I would say, the policies in most cases would suffice at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Anne.
All right, good. Is that all for now?
That's all for now. Thank you.
Good, good. Please feel free to ask more questions as they come up. Right. Oh goodness, I almost muted myself there. Let's move on to operate. Good, so in operate, now remember, this is the page where all of your staff is going to have access to, whether you're a partner, manager, PA, receptionist, whatever it is, this is what you're going to have access to. But the important part is only for your relevant parts. So everybody will have access to your system of quality management, and that's what we can see here. Now remember, mine is not a full one. So we have only 4 objectives here. If I had all 17 or 18 objectives completed, I would have seen literally all 17 or 18 of them. I can then expand all, simply clicking the button, and I can see the objective, the risk, the policy. Oh, that's where we end. Okay, the next one has a policy and so forth. But we can really expand and collapse as much as we need to. In this case, we even have a procedure. And in other cases, let's say, for example, with our annual declaration, we even have a task. So the colors will guide you, and as you get more and more familiar with it, you will realize and start to learn that blue is an objective, red is a risk, green, dark green is a policy, procedure, light green, and orange is my tasks. So that you can see how they all fit together. And we've also tried with a movement for you to really see, oh, here's a new risk because it's red, but it still falls under the objective of fulfilling the ethical requirements or whatever it was that we were busy with. All right, so that's where you can see your system. Also, if you double click on any of the fields, you can actually see a card of what's inside. We will, and we have hidden some of the information if users don't need to see everything, but you can at least see the gist of it, or maybe the reference where it comes from, or if you have a detailed additional information for a specific policy, you can see that kind of stuff in here as well. All right, so this is your quality manual, if you want, or your system of quality management. The users can also see the responsibilities, and this is your published responsibilities. So you can see here the 2 persons that I have published the 4 roles for. Remember, with Christian's one that I added in today's session, he hasn't signed off anything, so that won't appear. But I'm quite comfortable that it will probably appear once you've accepted your side. So just to address that question of the one user. And then tasks and findings. Now, tasks is my individual, my own area where I will see all the tasks that I've done before or that I still need to do. So tasks, I only see my own stuff, whether you're the partner, the manager, the trainee, whatever, you only see your own things. This is your workspace. So you'll see also that I've got a lot of manual tasks, and I've got that one automated task. The automatic task appeared by itself, okay, because we scheduled it. I think it had to do with something with the annual declarations or something. So there was a procedure that had a scheduling, there was a task that was linked to that, and it appeared by itself. I've already completed it, so it says submitted. The others have also been submitted already. There's one task in progress, which I was naughty, I haven't completed yet. So you can clearly see, hey, this one still needs to be completed. Then, oh, and there's another one that's also still in progress. If I now want to go, I get a gift and I want to go and complete the task, I can come and select the task, see which tasks are actually applicable in our firm, and then select the task. In this case, I'm going to say gift from client A. Right, gift from client A, gifts and inducements, create the task, and that now creates another entry into our gift register, basically. You can see that a new tab is created, and I now have that same form from before that we looked at almost in design mode earlier. Now we have it in the form where I, as the user, actually have to go and complete it. So I can actually complete all the fields and click submit. At this stage, I can see the description from the description or the name that I gave this task, and we can also see that it's still in progress. Okay. I'm not going to complete it now. It's going to take too much time, but you can clearly see there that there's drop-down menus and all fancy things, and all of this information will actually go into the report when we look at the monitoring of the persons completing this. Okay, findings we're going to look at later on when we're looking at monitoring. But operate essentially looking at the manual and completing the tasks applicable to my role only. So every single person will have access to operate. Before we move on, let me just quickly check my tips again. Operate, all users must read your system of quality management and must have access to it. So that's also why we started off with your licensing. We've spoken about the automated tasks. They work exactly the same way. The challenge is just that they appear by themselves. So we need to make sure in designing before we publish that everything works well there. And then manually create the tasks. Of course, I can create tasks for receiving gifts and all of those things repeatedly when I can manually create them. All right. Then we move on to operate overview. Operate overview, I think I said earlier on as well, only a few people will have access to this module. And that is really because this is where you can see everybody's content. So every single individual's annual declaration, I can go and monitor from here. Every single gift that they received or gave, I can come and monitor from here. So every instance of a task that has been completed, I can go and basically draw a report of those. So let's say, for example, I want to see the gifts that were received and I want to see the records thereof. So in this case, I just want to go for everything. I'm not sure how many records there are. So you can pick 50 or 100 or whatever it is, and there I can see all of the content of all of these entries. Right, so there's, for example, one where I got a gift or where I gave a gift to the client, a basket of sweets and savory snacks, and I completed all of those questions. I said, do I consider the gift to improperly influence the client's behavior? No. Was it accepted? Yes. What was the value, etc., etc., etc. I can see that, and we are happy. But I can also see one that's completely blank here, and that's only in progress. So what do? Now I go and I say, well, let's go and have a task or a discussion. If I'm the partner, for example, I say, dear, who's it, myself, Joanne, Christian, Joe, whoever it is, I see there's a task that was created on the 8th of August. You have not yet completed it. Please complete it. What's the reason, etc. So you can use your discussion and your task, your cloud collaboration functionality to follow up on these things. You could also, if you really wanted to, you could also export the data and go and analyze it in Excel and whatnot if you wanted to. So very, very helpful for us to then see exactly what's happening. If I create other information, I'm just picking another one that I know has got less columns, I can quickly and easily see what's happening here and who's already submitted it or not yet. Right. So very helpful then from an ongoing monitoring perspective. Also, if I go and have a look at our tips for Operate Overview, I think this is something where, especially as firms start to implement, and more so even as firms start to really make sure that things are happening, start to monitor almost, start to see how this process is working, or if users have actually bought into the process. This is where I believe you can really start to see the value. So you can allocate the responsibility to someone or more than one person, but it's important that that person be reminded of it. I might be a bit of a control freak, but also from knowing from one or two clients that use that implemented and where I had a look at some of the implementations, what I would even do is to say, if a person has the responsibility to do this, I would actually go and create a task, an automatic task, and ask that person to once a month or once every 3 weeks or however regularly you want the person to do it, create a task for that person to say, please sign off that you have reviewed the tasks and checked up on what you needed to. Even if it's just initially to get the person into that process, because I know of one or two of the procedures where a person had to go and sign off stuff regularly once a month, etc. It was meant to be done, the person got the email, but nothing then actually happened, and only like 4 or 5 months down the line that they actually realized, oh my word, that never happened. So I would rather use the automated tasks and actually schedule a task for that person regularly. I've mentioned this is really where the standards ongoing monitoring can actually be used without creating a whole monitoring work program every week, every 2 weeks, etc. But rather use Operate Overview to just quickly have almost like a little dashboard to see if everything is working as it should. And then, of course, using your cloud collaboration as well. Good. So that's Operate Overview. Then Monitor. Monitor is now that thing that needs to happen regularly, but also periodically, to see if the firm is doing what it should to meet the requirements of ISQM 1. Okay, I specifically say it like that. So what is important is that we're not either no longer or not at all only checking files to see if all the documentation is in the file. There's a strong drive to also monitor the system. So you will see, for example, in the understanding, we don't only remind ourselves of the understanding of the firm, we also understand about how the firm's system was designed. So again, it's possible that someone within your firm may do the monitoring, but it's also possible that someone from outside of your firm is going to do the monitoring, an external consultant. And in that case, then we've given the guidance also to say the standard also requires you to make sure you understand this firm. You're not just coming with your shopping list of ticks to complete on file reviews. You want to first understand this client before you're going to do the monitoring. You can imagine it's the same thing when an audit firm rocks up at a client and doesn't first understand the client itself, but tries to audit the balance sheet. It's never going to work. They're going to miss risks. They're going to miss issues. So first, the monitor is guided then to make sure they understand the firm and make sure how they develop their system, were there any changes in the year, etc. Because the monitoring process should then first monitor how was the system designed, how regularly do they reassess, how regularly do they change, were there any changes this year, why were there changes, what drove them to identify that there were changes, and a long list of things like that. And so then first, how did they design? Then how did they actually then, what was the result? How did they come about this? Was it just one person? Was it good enough? Did the person take everything into account? So actually this year specifically, monitoring is going to be a mammoth task. It really is going to be a big task because you cannot just monitor files. You cannot just say, oh, was the inducement register or gift register completed? You actually have to go and see, did we really go and design our system of quality management in line with what the standard requires? So that's the first thing. Then secondly, so I know a colleague of mine always talks about how were the policies and procedures designed, and then to check, are those policies and procedures in operation? So firm level if you want, and then to go to the files or to the registers and the whatnots and see, were those things actually working as they should? All right, so monitor, the monitoring person will have access to this, your evaluator will have access to this, your normal managers and partners and things don't need access to this, because where findings are raised for them, they will use Operate findings to go and address their findings, to respond to their findings, etc. So monitor is really only allocated to the people that really need access to it. Good. Then monitoring activities. Now, monitoring activities needs to be designed. So the first thing that I want to just press to heart is that monitoring activities is actually part of your system of quality management. So if you have not yet designed your monitoring activities, please do so urgently. So actually what should be happening is and I do that when I develop content. Just now when we worked through the ISQM 2 content, for example, I start with what is the objective, what is the risk, what is my policy, what is my procedure, how will I monitor this policy and procedure? So that's the last part. Of course, sorry, I missed out on the tasks now. But I do not stop with tasks. I only stop once I've developed or designed the monitoring activity. And so I need a full list of monitoring activities to test or to monitor every single policy procedure in my system. And of course, you can add more as well. There are additional requirements and things in ISQM 1 that you also need to include as part of your monitoring. So monitoring activities will again have mandatory monitoring activities. Why? Because these are the parts we are monitoring the mandatory policies and procedures. Okay, so that will be why you've got mandatory policies and procedures. And then again, we've got a library with monitoring activities with lots and lots and lots of, let me just show you there, lots, there's all content that's still loading, lots and lots of policies and procedures that you can add to your system. All right. What we've also done is in version 3 of the content of the libraries, I've even added additional policies and procedures, not that they're not required by the standard, but it's stuff that doesn't really belong in a policy or procedure. But I'm so scared that a firm is going to forget about something that I've rather added it as a policy than a procedure, so that you rather have it in your library rather than forget to actually also, for example, what is the one example that I had is to decide how are you going to select engagements, for example. So we've said there's a policy to say you must select a firm, you know, you must have an inspection cycle and everybody must be selected, but how do we choose which file to select this year? So we've implemented a policy and procedure for that. Okay, then once you've developed or designed and signed off all your monitoring activities, you can come back to understanding, and you'll see this little report here. Mine is quite big, but there's a report here that tells you or helps you to say which of the objectives or risks or policies or procedures or even tasks, if there are any, have not been linked to a monitoring activity. Just so that even if you select all your monitoring activities, that you don't actually have a procedure here, let's say, for example, resignations and withdrawals, and you didn't realize that you never actually recorded a monitoring activity for that one. Okay. Then work programs. Work programs really get created by selecting work program, selecting activities that you want to include, creating a name, and just clicking OK. I've already created a work program for us, and you can see you've got a nice color scheme going here, completed. We're still busy with, we still need to do it. This one's clearly overdue. And then also in this work program, you have the option then to say there's no exceptions, everything's working. There are exceptions, or I haven't completed this one, which if you don't complete it, then actually you need to document why not. Okay. In this case, I have recorded an exception for our inducements and gifts and said only gifts received were declared, no other hospitality and services. So only physical gifts. Then we go to the finding that was recorded by the monitoring person that said, well, only gifts, but the monitoring team was aware that some staff was treated to a spa day, and this was not approved and not recorded in the system, in the register. So obviously the policies and procedures were not complied with. This is then allocated to a responsible party or parties, and the manager, the partner, the whoever. You can even link all the team members if you want, and you click on update response. I'll show you what it looks like on their side just now, but essentially the person, let's say the audit manager, if it was an engagement file, will then get a request to say, please respond to this finding. At this stage, it's only a finding. Then the person gets the response back, the monitoring person. They can, if they're not happy with the response yet, pick up the phone, use Cloud Collaborate, email, whatever the case may be, to get more information, to get a better response, more detailed response, whatever is necessary. And then actually say, right, now I document and complete whatever I want, what additional information is necessary. And then I decide, is this a deficiency, as is required by the standard? If this is a deficiency, the monitoring personnel just says the severity and the pervasiveness and the effect on the system of quality management. And because it is a deficiency, you also need remedial action. So then I assign a person, I've assigned the same individual, so please go and do a root cause analysis and document your remedial action to address this no longer finding, but deficiency. Okay, so that's the process on the monitoring side. I'm going to just close these working programs. On the monitoring side, the findings are then all in a table for you. Nicely, you can export and have it for your reporting to your managing, to your partners, to your external persons, etc. We also have a table for remedial actions where you can see everything that needs to be there. And you could even generate reports for all monitoring activities by specific risks. You can have it by procedure, by objective, etc., as you wish to then go and actually look at it. Now, I promised you to also show you what those look like on the user side, the audit manager or the person that was responsible for recording the inducements, etc. Those are in the operate findings. So you can see I don't need access to monitor if I'm just an audit manager. I can deal with my findings in operate findings. There I've got a table. There's the specific finding that we've got there. And I've already recorded my response. If I've not recorded my response, I'll have a little pen. Please go and record your response. I have recorded my response and I've completed it as follows. So there again is a form for us. You can see I've already submitted it, but just so you see what it looks like, the finding, and then I recorded my response there to say, well, the partner went along, so surely she must have approved it. And we didn't know that we had to record spa days as well. We thought it was just gifts and chocolates and money and things like that. Okay. Poor excuse, but nonetheless. Then it required, so we said, no, that's a deficiency. We need a remedial action. So then I get another email to say, there's an action for you. I get to the remedial action part. And now, again, the finding, that was my response to the finding. And now I'm asked to go and document remedial actions. So I can add more than one remedial action. I'm just going to type something short, document what the root cause was, document what the remedial action is going to be. Okay. Of course, this doesn't happen 2 ticks. You're going to go do a proper root cause analysis, and that is then also added here. I could also link other remedial actions that was created for another finding and say, well, that one actually also addresses this finding, and then submit. And only once I've submitted it are all the remedial actions considered to be complete, and then the remedial actions have been completed. The monitor can then also see that the remedial actions have been added. There's ABC also now added in. If there's more than one finding link, that's recorded, etc. Just quickly, 2 ticks on evaluate. Evaluate gives the evaluator access to the same reports that I showed you earlier on. You have an evaluate program. I've already created one for us here, just to see that you've given step-by-step guidance on what you should have done as the evaluator. And even with specific instances to say, even if you have findings that are severe but not pervasive, etc., and you do this and you looked at that and the team's already addressed it, etc., then you could still possibly conclude on a specific conclusion. So we've really tried to give you as much guidance as possible in basically a declaration that's combined with a work program to say, this is how you can conclude, and then you select what are the identified deficiencies, severe, pervasive, etc. You conclude on the 3 options in ISQM 1, and you can also raise findings, deficiencies rather, that can be addressed. Those deficiencies, just to show you, remedial actions did not include an update, for example. So if I then go to evaluate actions, that's where I will then find the additional actions. I think I didn't actually sign off on that response, but the actions will then all appear here, which will then be the remedial actions from the evaluation process. Okay. Just in terms of the tips as well, I skipped the monitoring tips now. Remember, your monitoring activities must be designed. Use that report of not monitored as a completeness test. If there's anything on your report not monitored, you might still need additional monitoring activities. You'll do your monitoring at both firm and engagement level, and your monitoring is only really completed once your findings and your remedial actions is documented. If it's not all implemented, that's fine, because some things take time. But only once all of this is done can you actually go to the evaluate stage, where the evaluator then has to complete their part. And the evaluation, just remember, we're on the 15th of August today, right? Come 15 December, it's only a few months away. We have to have our first evaluation done. And you need those monitoring results to be able to get that done. And as I've mentioned, the work program is giving you the steps to follow, helps you with the conclusions, and if there are any serious issues, you raise additional queries with additional remedial actions. All right, Christian, any questions?
No questions, Joanne. I just want to make the guys aware that I have posted in the chat, the session has been recorded. So if they want to go and have a look at it, it will be posted on our YouTube page. And we also have our Getting Started on our Success community, with the link available there. So if they want to recap on any of the page menu items or the modules, those items together with the introductions, the how-to documents and the how-to videos are then available for them within the Getting Started series. So on the community Getting Started, and they can see that there. If there's no other questions, doesn't seem like it, thank you everyone for joining. And we will then post the recording a bit later today so that you can see it. And good luck with setting up your system of quality management. Reach out to us if you have any questions or if you have want to clarify anything. I hope you have a great day further.
Thanks, Christian. Goodbye from my side as well, and enjoy your day.